So, Dominique, we're here to do a thing where we promise to have fun later, but right now we'd have to timestamp this conversation because this is the sort of story that you've been discussing all day, but that I want to now probe your brain on because Damar Hamlin is the biggest name in American sports. It's a name that nobody honestly knew until he collapsed on Monday Night Football in the first quarter, and there was CPR on the field and an ambulance and crying faces, and trauma became, I don't know, the resting state of the entire football community. And so, as we talk, he is in critical condition at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. He was in the ICU. He was sedated. His family promises updates. We hope those updates are good. But this was different from the Tua story, from the Ryan Shazier story, because this had an element, a question I think that is yet to be resolved by medical authorities as to why this happened.
Yeah.
And I wonder if your brain immediately went to football as violence versus roulette wheel of mortality that spins and all of us are at its whims, in general.
Yeah, my first feeling, honestly, was like seeing the play and wondering how much football had to do with this. As much as I
Yeah.
made the broader conversation about all football players, I think it's fair to do that and about the impact of the sport on the players. What happened in that game felt so like routine that eh, it made me wonder the answer to all the questions that I'm sure we'll get eventually is like, what actually happened? And we don't know. We know like the big broad details. His heart stopped. They did CPR. He wasn't breathing on his own. Uh, like we know that.
Yep. ICU, critical care right now.
Yeah.
Updates to come.
But we don't we don't know what caused it. And we had a doctor on Get Up this morning that talked about the many different ways that something like this could happen, and there's no way to know without being like intimately involved, which she was not. So I think that's the first question. Uh, it's like, is he going to be all right? Now, how did this happen? Why did it happen? What can we do to keep it from happening again?
Right. 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 I mean, to the extent that this is something that feels then like a generalizable case study. Let me ask you the Saturday morning cartoon sort of take on this. What did we learn here today? What did we learn, Dominique? What's different? Because so much of it was different. Again, the ritual was shattered. A game for the first time in NFL history was declared too uncomfortable, at the very least, to proceed. It's not going to be played this week. It may never be played, as far as the NFL has told us.
Another dynamic of this is like how quickly we can gin up this compassion, and also like how much more painful it has to be, because we all felt pain. I don't think, like, even though I think a lot of us were like performing somewhat this act of sympathy, I think everyone was hurt by that because it was like shocking.
Oh, no. I think everybody, I mean, this is maybe the most optimistic view I have on the human condition. If you were to poll everybody watching Monday Night Football, I think we all would have voted in the direction of, I hope nothing else bad happens to this person.
Yeah.
I think we were all rooting for this to not be death, to be the worst thing that was obviously right at the center of our brains.
And you can't imagine how the people close to him feel. Like, it's not something you can pretend. And I've been on the field when players have been paralyzed. I've had teammates multiple times die. One was killed and one died of a heart condition. Um, I was
Man.
at a preseason game where a player on the opposing team died in the locker room. Like I played against Chris Henry, who died as a result of falling off of a truck, and I was like, it's I've been close to and around a bunch of things like this, but none of it is like this.
Well,
You know, like none of it is like this. None of it actually feels like this. Having been on the field and imagining how his teammates must feel, I've never like. It may not make sense to very many people, but it does really feel like family because you spend so much time with your teammates. Like, you work with them, you go out with them, you experience hard things, you experience easy things, you experience success and sadness and failure. It does really feel like you guys are brothers. And then to go out on the field with the expectation of like winning, and worst case scenario, maybe losing. Worst case scenario, somebody could tear ACL. Like that is the most dramatic thing that you imagine could happen.
That's what you allow yourself to consider as the
Yeah.
range of possibilities on a given day.
And then one of them heart stops beating and you're watching him have CPR performed. I think you and
Yeah,
I have had these conversations before about work in general. And when we get these opportunities to talk about important, serious things, I try to maximize those opportunities. And obviously, it goes without saying at this point that what happened on that field is a tragedy. And we don't have any like new information. And yeah, we can't make all these big grandiose proclamations that I think we want to. We all just feel helpless. But I think it's important to show the proper respect to him and his family. But I think it's also important to put all of this in a broader context because while we talk about sports, there's one sport that's a little different from all the major sports, and that's football. It's different in its popularity and it's different in the risk and danger that its players expose themselves to, and the long-term
absolutely.
impacts and the short-term impacts. And we've all anybody who's been watching football for long enough, you've seen people be paralyzed in the game. You've seen people get knocked out, and you've seen
Yep.
guys' brains deteriorate to the point where they thought the best alternative was to shoot themselves in the head. These are all things that happen in football that doesn't happen in any of the other major American sports. Like I'm sure there are suicides in those sports, but they're normally not directly tied to the game itself.
It's
So
not seen as an epidemic in the
right,
way that it is in the sport that you played, correct.
right. And not just seen as an epidemic, but feels like if not completely causal, like certainly a big component to like some of the long-term uh mental deterioration that some players experience. So I think we all feel helpless. And I've talked about this all day, and it doesn't make you feel like you have more power and control, but we all want to do something. And you and I text about this last night is like how we try, or at least I was trying not to pass judgment on everyone's reaction, but I just was annoyed, so annoyed
Well,
by.
let's talk about what we were talking about before we even contemplated what we were gonna say on fake
Okay.
television, because we were texting, and your first text, I believe, was, "They're really gonna play this game, huh?" And my response was, "Like they always do." And the fact that we did not get what always happened, the fact that we got something that felt to me like a breaking of a ritual that had been well worn in the way that you just alluded to, from Ryan Shazier to Tua Tagovailoa this season, right? We had like dress rehearsals for the discourse, Dominique.
Mhm.
But the way the game played out, which is to say it did not play out, left us with something that was substantively different. And so when you're saying you're feeling annoyed by the reactions, how does the lens of this feels different, how did that affect what you were feeling as a guy, again, who had to see this in a uniquely, on this program at least, personalized way?
Yeah, I mean, I assumed when we came back from commercial the first time and they showed Josh Allen covering his nose and mouth and looking surprised or shocked or something more dramatic than that. And Stephon Diggs is crying. Players are hugging each other, and some are like kind of walking aimlessly away from the crowd. I assumed the worst, and I assumed the game was going to be canceled. And then we got the, I guess, report that they're getting them 5 minutes to warm up and play again. That's when I was
Yep.
like, No, they're not
This the since
actually.
disputed,
Yeah.
famous, infamous
Which
5
I
minute
mean,
warning.
I believe that that's not what actually happened. My guess is, from what I understand, Joe Buck got the information from their like referee consultant, right? And my guess is, having been a part of games like this, the protocol is like, what is the protocol for a game that's been temporarily stopped due to weather or injury? My guess is they just said what the protocol was. Not that these players have been told that they have 5 minutes to play, right? Like, there's no way that that's what actually happened. We've been having these conversations all day, which, like, this is probably why this conversation that you and I have had has gone so far afield of the incident, the initial incident. But I want to like spin it forward and have answers and have, but I don't feel like we do. So like I feel
I know.
uncomfortable talking about the incident because it's an uncomfortable thing to talk about, but I feel even more uncomfortable talking about what's going to happen next, cuz what's going to happen next is dependent on what happens with Damar Hamlin, and talking about the impacts of the on the game, eh, based on what happens to Damar Hamlin without even knowing what happens to him, like speculating on, like, it all feels terrible.